Hey everyone, back again. Today I'm going to talk about Roland Barthes' essay, The World of Wrestling, which is found in his text, Mythology. So yeah, I'll talk about that today. Hi, I'm David. I like to explain, I can't speak today. I like to explain philosophical ideas in a way to make them accessible to you. So if you're new here, you can go check out my channel. You'll see like 250 videos. You can subscribe and you'll see videos I release every single week, sometimes twice a week. If you want to help me out, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. Who knows, they might get a kick out of it. If you found this on YouTube, you're going to be able to find it in podcast form pretty much anywhere where you get podcasts. Or if you found this in podcast form, you're going to be able to find it on YouTube with a video if you're into that at all. Yeah, if you want to help me out monetarily, you can do that via Patreon or PayPal, but obviously no pressure. And links for that in the description if you're interested. And yeah, let's talk about Roland Barthes' The World of Wrestling. So this opens the book Mythology, which is kind of his mythologies, which is his probably his most pronounced important text. And this text is essentially a way for him to understand the way that ideas become naturalized in the world, how they become almost like cultural myths, and how these myths become natural and therefore unquestionable. And his book here is an effort to understand and to reveal the extent to which these myths aren't natural, how they are culturally coded and determined and established. Now, in this essay, The World of Wrestling, what he is doing is looking at wrestling as almost a demonstration of such myths, including myths pertaining to justice, to good and evil, and so on. Now, wrestling, he says, has a long history. Like as a sport, certainly it goes all the way back to ancient Greece. But the wrestling he's talking about here is that spectacular form that is kind of like presents a narrative. And this also, for him, has its roots in ancient Greek theater. It's all about enacting a kind of play for an audience. Now, of course, the venue is different. It's not done in open air theater or something like that. It's done in probably a building, dark building, where the actors are essentially acting out in a different space, but they both resemble one another in that they are demonstrating and performing a kind of play. So it's important to note then, it's not a sport. It's more of a spectacle, because no one thinks that there's actually like a competition going on with wrestling in this way. And again, we're talking about the spectacular form of wrestling, not like the actual competition. And nobody thinks that it is, right? No one goes thinking that there's like an actual competition being had here. It's scripted in advance. So in contrast to something like real wrestling or like boxing or judo, in wrestling as a spectacular form, what we see is not ever like conclusive moments that are to be almost avoided. So in boxing or in wrestling that is competitive, people try to avoid defeat. Whereas in the case of this kind of wrestling, defeat is something that enters and becomes part of the spectacle, and people gyrate, people contort their faces and exaggerate their expressions to lend a sense to what defeat means in any instance and what victory means in any instance. And it all plays towards the entire spectacle. There isn't like that end point that will determine things and it will be done. It sort of always implies a futurity to it. And for those that are familiar with wrestling, these narratives extend far beyond any single match to ones to come as well. And the outcome of any given match can sometimes even be determined in advance. And this comes out in the ways that the actors are presented. They appeal to certain codes that people understand and associate with goodness. They associate with evil, like people dressing in certain colors that the audience will associate with being bad, people having certain attributes that people associate with being bad. And so Barthes is thinking about this wrestling as almost like a window to look through to understand the culture in which it is embedded. What are these codes that are set up, that are used to elicit a sense of anger at a certain character, at a certain actor? What codes are used to convey that someone is good, versus evil, and how we can unpack these codes and better understand ourselves. So what the people want when they're watching wrestling is not this competition. They want intelligibility. And what I mean by that is they want to see things that make sense to them, which only means that they are watching things that make sense to them culturally, as they understand certain signs to refer to certain things, certain signs referring to evil, to good, to justice, and so on. And at the core of all of this in wrestling is often a demonstration of justice, or a lack of justice, and how that feeds into the entire enterprise. Now, he notes that there's a difference here between the wrestling he's talking about, and he wrote this in the late 50s, the wrestling he's talking about in France and that of America, where he says that in America people were associating with certain characters, or they were watching wrestling as a match between good and evil, whereas he says that in France people would associate with the just figures who stood in for and defended justice, while admonishing those who broke the rules, who did not comply to what was just to the law. So in France, and this is very much true in America as well, certainly today, people hate those characters that break the rules, who jump out of the ring when they aren't supposed to, who sucker punch their opponent behind the ref's back. And all of this, even though it's all stage, contributes to the audience's animosity toward, or ire toward, those certain people who break the law, break the rules when it is convenient for them, and they follow them when it's convenient for them. And this generates a very effective, very real embodied response by the audience, which attests to the fact that there is a strong attachment between the people watching and their conception of what is right and wrong, what is just. And by seeing that be played with on stage demonstrates a kind of mastery on the part of the actors, of the writers of these productions, to play with that cultural understanding of justice, to be able to exploit it and to reveal the extent to which we are very much attached to it and committed to it and want to defend it, and how using that in order to present certain actors, certain characters as being evil is really quite genius, and it says a lot about ourselves. And in wrestling, where everything is just so black and white, you know who's good, you know who's evil, you know who's following justice, you know who's not following justice, it puts forward in Barthes' words an ideal image of things, or an ideal understanding of things, which is to say that it complies to our most basic understanding of law of justice, of good and evil, which makes it so easy to digest, and therefore makes it such a rich avenue for people to study in order to engage with the people that are watching it and the cultural situation they find themselves in. And it speaks to a kind of natural law. And what I mean by that is that if there was a natural law, hypothetically, that provided the foundation for something called justice, that natural law would be decidedly simple. It would be something that was black and white. There's just simply right and wrong. Now, in society, things get muddied up a little bit. Partiality comes into the frame, perspective comes into the frame, and that messes things up. So we have a desire to try to make things simple. And this is really put on display in wrestling, that almost like appeals to some kind of natural law, even though that, of course, that natural law doesn't exist. By putting it out on stage and by having an audience completely comply with it and to understand when rules are broken without anyone coming out and saying, look, X, Y, and Z rules were broken, so you should be mad about this. People just have an immediate sense, kind of perception of it. That reveals the extent to which we have naturalized these very laws. We have naturalized this conception of justice, which works then to not only provide good entertainment, but to affirm our understanding of what justice is, to naturalize it and have it enter into the world or for it to enter the world as myth and then become natural, as though it cannot be questioned. And yeah, that more or less covers this kind of short essay. I'll probably do scattered presentations of the different essays in this book, because it's hard to do it all at once. Each chapters or each essay is so different that it wouldn't make sense. So it'll make for shorter ones. And yeah, if there's anything I excluded, I'd love to hear about it. Or anything I got wrong, I'd love to hear about it. If you like what I did, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. And yeah, catch you next time. Take care.